Okay, great. So great to see all of you. Good evening, and welcome to the Phillips Collection. I am Ashley Whitfield. I am the head of public programs here. I have had the great pleasure of welcoming many of you to this very auditorium for special film screenings and talks, conversations, and so much more. But I'm afraid to tell you that this evening is an exception. And it's an exception because it is not only special, it is unprecedented. Oh. This evening, we will hear from and later participate in through the Q&A a conversation between Dani Levinas, Chairman Emeritus of the Phillips Collection Board of Trustees, and the Vrandenburg Director and CEO of the Phillips Collection, Dr. Jonathan P. Binstock. We are celebrating the publication of Dani Levinas' thoughtful collection of interviews, The Guardians of Art, Conversations with Major Collectors. Thank you. And now I'd like to share a few notes on their bios. In addition to serving as Chairman Emeritus at the Phillips Collection, Dani Levinas also serves on the board of the Reina Sofia Museum, Spain, and previously held a seat on the board of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden here in Washington, D.C. Levinas is a contemporary art collector. He is a guest lecturer at the Universidad Europea of Madrid, where he taught a course titled The Art Industry. He is a regular contributor to El País, the Spanish newspaper about art and patronage. Levinas has organized exhibitions, including one featuring Argentinian artist Leon Friera at the Arlington Art Center in Virginia, as well as in Argentina in focus Christian Segura and Segura Vega at the Museum of the Americas, also here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Jonathan P. Binstock is the Vrandenburg Director and CEO of the Phillips Collection. He comes to us from following 8 years as the Mary W. and Donald R. Clark Director of the Memorial Art Gallery of the University of Rochester in New York. During his tenure in Rochester, Binstock led an expansion and diversification of the museum's permanent collection, special exhibition program, and public engagement efforts, as well as a significant increase in the museum's annual budget. Prior to the Memorial Art Gallery, Binstock served as the Senior Vice President for Modern and Contemporary Art in the Art Advisory and Finance Group of Citi Private Bank. He was Curator of Contemporary Art at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., also here from 2000 until 2007, and Assistant Curator at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia from 1998 to 2000. Great bios. Thank you again for choosing to spend your evening here with us. We're so thrilled to have you and to welcome you. Looking forward to this very engaging conversation and the Q&A, and also to seeing you just across the hall for the book signing immediately following. Okay, enjoy. Thank you.
Welcome, Dani. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Is my mic on? Yeah, good. You can hear me. It's nice to see you. We were just in Paris. And we were looking at a Rothko painting, which I think was in that exhibition. Looks better in the show than it does on the screen.
That's true.
That's a different conversation. So this is the book we are here to discuss. It's a really fun read for a number of reasons. Learning about art through the eyes of collectors is, of course, at least for me, of course, an interesting thing to do. And it's also, very cleverly put together because it's not just a document of the conversations. It is a brief, or each conversation is summarized or really condensed in a way that gets you to the heart of the particular collector or the collectors with whom Dani is talking about. It also is the color yellow, which is my favorite color.
Well, I'm glad.
Did you design the cover?
I helped a little bit.
You did?
Just a little bit.
Do you like yellow too?
I love it.
Okay, so we have a lot in common. There will be a book signing afterwards, very important part because Dani has very generously donated these books to the Phillips. So every book you buy goes to support my dining budget, which is quite significant at this point. All right, what made you start, what encouraged you and inspired you to start interviewing collectors? And when did you start interviewing them? And did you start interviewing them because you thought they were going to go into a book? Tell us about the beginning.
No, I didn't think they were going to end up in a book. I started almost 4 years ago, and it was kind of an experiment. I spoke to somebody in a newspaper in Spain called El País, which is an important newspaper and actually has a very large circulation all over the world in Spanish through the web page. And I was talking to the person who's in charge of the cultural section, which is also very well known. And I just had an idea, and I said, what about if I write something about collecting or collectors? And he says, well, why don't you do one and we'll see what happens. So my first interview was with Alain Perrin, who is the founder and the chairman of the Cartier Foundation for Contemporary Art in Paris. And I knew him from before, but many years before. And I went to Paris, and I said, I would like to interview you. And he normally doesn't do this. And I never did it before. So we were too new for this. And, but I did it, and then after interviewing him, I wrote about it, and I presented it to El País, and they published it, they liked it, and they offered me, why don't you do this once a month, so every 2 months. So that's how I started. Sorry. And I enjoy it very much because I learn a lot from those interviews. And I always say that it ended up being a book many years later, especially because my late wife, Mirella, insisted that I should put all of the interviews together and do a book. I was not ready to do it, but she insisted, and then unfortunately she died, and so, in an homage to her, I put the book together, and it was edited especially for the book with the photographs and so on, and we did it. But when I started, I never expected that this was going to end up being a book.
Were your first interviews condensed for the El País, the way they are condensed in this book?
Yes. There was some editing. Some interviews ended up being longer here than in El País, and some shorter. It depended on the space that at that time El País had for the column.
Did you leave any interviews out of the book that you had completed by the time you were editing the book?
Yes.
How many?
Some.
Did you not like those interviews?
Well, it was a discussion with the editor. You know, some were more important than others, and I agree. After, you have to listen to your editor, which is not easy to do, but you have to listen to your editor.
Yeah. All right. So, how do you conduct the interviews? Right. So, where are you? Are you taking notes? Are you recording the interview? What does it look like?
First of all, I try to interview the collector or collectors at their home, because I think that it's very important to see how they live with their own artworks. So it's in their houses, or sometimes if they have a space, like a private museum or a space where they show the collection, I do it there. So with the exception of the time of the pandemic, that I had to interview them through Zoom because I couldn't travel and so on. Every other interview was done in their homes or in their spaces. And to me, that is very important because I like to see how they hang their own works of art. How do they express themselves in front of the works of art? How they, when they tell you the stories about how they bought the piece or what made them buy a piece and so on, they go in front of that artwork and they express themselves. And then it's when I say that I open my eyes to listen better, because sometimes it's important to see how they move, how they open their eyes, and I think that is reflected in the interviews when I write about them. And that is not something that you can have in a tape recorder.
Yeah.
I do have a tape recorder. Sometimes it fails, and there were some surprises, but I also take notes. So I do it. So I learned to take 2 tape recorders now.
So you record, you take notes.
And I look, and I see, yeah.
All right. Is there something that links all of these? Is there something that they all share, have in common, the collectors?
Well, obviously,
They collect art.
they collect art, and I think that they're passionate about it. But there are differences between all of them in the sense that they're passionate in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I won't be able to describe you the different passions, but they are passionate about art. The way of collecting might be different, but they all, this is something that is in their blood. They can't stop collecting, and it's like a disease. You start collecting, and it's hard to stop.
So in your opinion, what is the most appealing passion, and what is the least appealing passion of the collectors you have interviewed?
The least appealing passion is if the collector thinks about the value of the work when he makes the decision. And the most appealing passion is when he buys because he loves what he's looking at. And of course, nobody just buys, but they study the artist and where the artist showed and who talked about the artist, etc., etc. But the first feeling was looking at something and saying, wow, this is doing something to my heart.
I'm going to ask a question that's going to be very difficult to answer.
Then I won't.
You know, what's your opinion of the person who loves the price, the value at which they got the work? Where does that fall in the...
Look, let me make a distinction between a collector and a buyer.
Okay.
A collector collects because he's passionate about collecting, and he understands art, and he studies, and he reads a lot, and he listens to people, and he goes to a lot of exhibitions and museums, and he keeps reading and reading and reading, and that's his life. And he spends a lot of hours a day thinking about art and studying art. The buyer, there are different kinds of buyers. One buyer is a buyer who just made a lot of money and buys a new apartment or a new house, and he looks at the walls and they're empty, and he says, we need paintings. If he has a lot of money, he probably lives in the same building where there are other people like him who already did that. So he looks and he goes and he says, well, he has one Warhol and one this, and so I need one of those too. So that's a buyer. Now, that doesn't mean that that buyer might not be in the future a collector, because he gets the bug, you know, he gets the disease. He buys first badly because he goes just to put something in the walls, especially something with good names, and then he starts liking it, and he can come. So that's one kind of buyer. Another kind of buyer is somebody who buys because he's speculating about the prices of the art. He says, this is something that is hot, I'm going to buy it now, and then I'm going to keep it put them in storage. I don't care about it. And then in the future, I'm going to sell it. So that's another buyer. Mm. And so the difference between collector and buyer is that now, if you think about it, it doesn't matter. He's a buyer, any kind of buyer, or he's a collector. They're all helping the market. And what is the market? What is the art market? First of all, he helps the artists, the galleries, the insurance company, the transport company, the installers, the curators, the directors of the museums, It's a big, this artwork it starts with somebody painting in front of a canvas and ends up being something really huge. And so if they buy, let them buy.
So that's really interesting to me. So you referred to the buyer who could become a collector.
Yes.
So is that the most exciting or interesting way a collector's strategy has changed over the course of their collecting history? Or what are, you met a bunch of people who are collectors, obviously. What are some of the really exciting evolutions that you've encountered?
I would say that, let me give you an example of a collector he lives all over the world, but he's in New York. Kaplan is his last name. And he collects Rembrandt and the school of Rembrandt. And he was not a collector growing up, but he tells me the story that when he was very young, 10, 12 years old, his mother used to take him to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And they will go there every Sunday. And the award was that at the end, she will buy him ice cream right on the bottom of the steps. And every Sunday they will go to the... And then one day the mother took him to the MoMA. And he was standing in front of a white painting. There was only white. Probably... What's his name?
Robert Ryman.
Robert Ryman. And 12 years old, and he says to his mother, "Mom, take me back to the Metropolitan." And so many years went by, he studied, I don't know what he studied, but it wasn't what he decided he was going to do. He decided he was going to go to Bolivia, of all places, to find silver or gold or something. And he did. And the father, the mother said, "Are you nuts? You study something else. What do you know about mining?" And he goes there and he finds gold or silver. And he makes a lot of money. Then he goes to Africa and he starts buying other mining companies. And he becomes very, very, very wealthy. And many years later, he's traveling with a friend. And the friend says, "You should start collecting art." And he says, "I am not a collector. I don't have any time. I don't know anything about it. What should I collect?" And his friend says, "Well, you should collect Rembrandt." And he starts laughing. He says, "How can you collect Rembrandt? All the Rembrandts are in the museums." And he says, "No, not all the Rembrandts are in the museums." So if a year went by or something, he forgot about it. And then he said, "Maybe I should investigate this." And he does. He's a very bright guy and very smart, and he studies a lot, and he decides that he's going to go to London and talk to the two more important Rembrandt experts. And he says, "Can I collect Rembrandt?" And both of them said, "Yes." "Okay, I want to do it," he says, "but there are two conditions." He says to these two experts who are going to be helping and looking for the pieces, etc. "You never lie to me, and when I say the price, that's the price. There's no bargaining. There's only one price." And they both agree, and he started collecting Rembrandt. And it's amazing that he made an incredible collection over the years of Rembrandt and the school of Rembrandt, and he became an expert. So much so that one time he was, I think he was in Italy, and in an antique shop, and he saw a very small drawing of the head of a lion. And he said to the antique dealer, "This is a Rembrandt." And the antique dealer said, "No, it's not a Rembrandt. It's not even close." And he said, "It is a Rembrandt." And so he bought it, he took it to the experts, and they recognized that this was a Rembrandt. And his collection is so important now that it was the first time that a private collection was shown at the Louvre, and it was this happened like 3 or 4 years ago. The complete collection was shown there.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is that the people that I interview, most of them are patrons of the arts, meaning that they show what they have in different ways, lending to institutions or having their own spaces, etc. He doesn't have his own space, but he has a website that is absolutely fantastic, and that it's free. Each work of art that is in that website has a big study by some expert about that particular piece. And you're free to copy that and to copy the photographs. Everything is free. You can use anything, and they do it in many universities because he has an incredible knowledge in that website.
Do you know how many Rembrandts he's collected now?
I don't know the number. I have to say that the majority are drawings, but there are some paintings. I mean, I don't know, 10 or 20 paintings, maybe less than 10, 20, but there is a lot of drawings, and then paintings by the school of Rembrandt.
Okay, great story. Thank you, fascinating. Well, you can be a Rembrandt collector.
Yes, just need to have own a mine, a gold mine first.
All right, so you're continuing to interview collectors. You publish your interviews in the same format, the condensed format?
Yes.
In El País?
Yes.
Other places or just El País?
Just El País.
And so do you have like a Moby Dick collector that is the collector you really want to interview, or the collectors that you really want to interview, but maybe it's going to be hard?
I'm not going to give you any names, but there are collectors who I would like to interview, and there are collectors who maybe a year ago will say no, and now that the book is published, they say yes. Mm-hmm. And I have a funny story because I was in Spain. There was an art fair, and there was a dinner. And I go to this house, and there are two collectors, and they happen to be, one lives in Argentina, the other one was born in Argentina, but lives in Miami, and is a very prominent collector. He has a museum on his name too. And I walked into that garden, and they're both sitting together talking, and they said to me, "We don't want to talk to you, and we are going to burn all your books." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because you didn't put us in the book." So I promised that I was going to interview them, and actually I did one already, and I'm going to do the second soon.
I told you, it's a good-looking book. All right, let's get a little bit down and dirty. Okay, no names. I can see you don't want to use names. So we're not asking for names. But the art world, and especially the art market, can be a little bit, maybe you can, it can be a little bit dirty, a little bit unethical, a little bit, things, you read about money laundering and you meet all kinds of things in the paper. So no names, but we want juice, we want gossip. Tell us, what is the most distasteful, ugly, upsetting collecting habit or strategy that you have encountered in your...
No, I select nice people. And so I don't have those kind. I can tell you other stories, but I cannot tell you any stories like that.
All right, tell me another story.
And I have to say that one of the reasons that I think this book is important to me is because this is a book that I would have liked to see and read when I started collecting. Mm. And there was no book like this, because you can see the different reasons for how people collect, and the reason that they collect in general, and so on, and what do they do with the collection, etc. But in the newspaper, the articles are called interviews with the patrons of the arts. We call it mecenas in Spanish. And so, and what does it mean to be a patron of the art? It's not somebody who just collects for himself. He collects, but he wants the society or the experts or the students to be able to see what they collect. And so when you have that in mind, then you collect in a different way, I think, and you are open to the public. The ones who collect in secret and they use the money that is probably not very kosher to buy, they are not so willing to show the collection. Mm. I once was with somebody in Spain having dinner, and he started talking to me about their collection that used to be his grandfather's collection and his father's collection, etc. And he had Velázquez and Goya and Murillo and all the, I mean, huge collection of very important paintings. And I said, I would like to interview you. And he said, I'm sorry, Dani, but I cannot do it. And I said, why? Well, first of all, it's my family collection, it's not my collection, and so on. And we live in Spain. And that's all he said. And my understanding is people are afraid sometimes of saying what they have sometimes because of the government and sometimes because of security. But the government issue, meaning taxes, it's a big issue. So some people say, well, I bought this many years ago and I don't want tomorrow that the government is going to say, whatever you have to pay a tax or a wealth tax or whatever they call it. So some people don't want to tell you what they have or they don't want to be published.
Yeah.
But it's true that I don't think that from the people that I interview, there were people who were the way that you described it. But that exists. It exists in the market, and there are, and there are very famous cases in New York, in South America, and some in Europe that people were laundering money through artwork because art is not regulated. And every time that I say that art should be regulated, everybody in the audience wants to throw tomatoes at me. But I think it should be, for many reasons, but that's another book.
Mm. So I'm just going to make sure that we have time for, yeah, we're good.
Good, okay.
Yeah. So can you, I want to know, what is the worst painting or work of art?
No.
You're not going to answer, are you?
No.
Come on.
But you are surprised sometimes about the people who, I went to, actually, Elena...
What about the one you want?
Yes, no, go back. You go, no,
go back?
Okay.
I can go back.
This.
Marilyn Minter.
No, the name of the collectors are Elena Rueda and Marcos Martin. Rafael is the son.
Okay.
So Marcos died a year ago or something. And these are collectors in Spain, in Segovia. And so everybody said to me, you have to go see this collection. And I go there, and they live in a small house, and they're old, and if you look at them, when you go to an art fair and you see the people, they're all dressed like collectors. Okay, these two are not dressed like collectors, and at all. And she does artwork, which is terrible, and with sunglasses, and I don't know what she does. And he used to be a guy who had his business was to sell pigs. And he made a lot of money selling pigs.
Those pigs in Spain are very good.
They are expensive. And so he says, I'm going to show you my collection. The house is full of paintings all over the place. There's no 1 centimeter in the wall that you can. So he says, let me show you my collection. And I said, isn't this your collection? No, my collection is downstairs. So we go downstairs, and there's a huge, huge basement with incredible doors against the fire and so on. And everything is in boxes. So you can't see anything. And there are little pieces of paper with the name of the artist and the name of the piece and so on. And you see the names of the artists, and you say, it's amazing. How did this guy... Now, he doesn't speak one word of English. Mm-hmm. When he started collecting, I think because of his brother-in-law, I don't remember exactly, but he decided he was going to go to New York to buy art. No English. He goes to Marian Goodman, and he goes to, to all the big galleries, and he starts buying. And he has a good eye, and he really buys really good stuff. But most of the stuff is very, very sexually oriented. You see this picture? This is Pamela Anderson. This is part of the picture, okay? But they're all really, but good paintings, and especially good photographs by the famous American and German photographers. And so I said so we finished the conversation, he invites me to lunch and so on, and then his son, Rafael, takes me back to the hotel, and I said, what's going on with your father? And he says, well, when he was young, he was kind of a crazy man. He used to go every night to these nightclubs, and he was obsessed with this subject. And so because he was so obsessed, this is what he did with his collection. But it wasn't only women, it was men, and it was sexual orientation, wherever you want to call it, from all kinds. And you see the men, and you see the town that he grew up, and you cannot imagine that this person had this incredible taste, but only looking at this kind of art. So these are the surprises when you go to the collectors that you don't know much about them. Everybody says it's a good collector, you should go see it. The galleries tell you this is a great collector. But you are surprised when you go and you see, and he never had somebody telling him that you should buy this or that. Everything he did by himself. Now, the funny story about this is that they don't have room to put it, and the son says, I want to create a museum to show the collection, but I want it to be here. And I said, but there's no room in this place to have a museum. It's very small. I want it here, and I want the city to give me money to buy the church next door and to buy this. And he's been trying to do this for years and totally unsuccessful. So he decided that he was going to buy containers and put the works in containers. I said, but this is not the right thing to do. There are people who are experts in museums, that you should get their help. No, I'm going to do it myself, like my father did. Well, I think the guy is nuts, but it's not the only one that I interview. So anyway, every collector has a story, and if you want me to tell you one thing that I think that is common to most of the collectors, not all of the collectors, is that the parents had a lot of influence on them becoming a collector, and especially the mother. For some reason, if you listen to the stories, the mother of the collectors, somehow they influence on them becoming a collector or loving art. So that, I would say, is something that the majority has in common.
I'm trying to think of a question to ask you about the fashion for private museums, collectors. Your story makes me think of the collector in Rochester, where I used to live. There is a person who is an artist, and her husband was an artist, and one of them, he has this vision of taking this house kind of in the middle of nowhere and turning into a museum with all their art. And, the question becomes, well, who's gonna come look at it? So do you have, an opinion about this thing that's happening globally. And in China, there are all these incredibly powerful, wealthy people who promised to make museums. They bought all the galleries, sold them all their best stuff, and now they're dumping it on the market because times are tough in China.
That is correct.
So it sounds like you were telling this person, you should really call the museum or a museum and get some advice, because is that your automatic response?
Well, if people don't have an idea how to do it, of course that's what they have to do. But what is the reason that they want to open their own? That's what I think is interesting. And many of these people here have their own places. I mean, in Miami alone, there are 3 family collections. And so it gets to a point that they ask the question, what do I do with all this art? And what are the options? They can, of course, sell it. They can donate it to the museums. But museums today do not accept everything that somebody wants to donate. I mean, you know that better than anybody else. And especially when the collector says, I'm going to donate you my collection, but I don't want you to split it. I want you to keep the whole collection. You cannot have my collection and then sell some pieces. I want you to keep, and I want you to show my collection. And so the museums say, well, we can't do it, even if it is the Metropolitan, because first of all, not everything that somebody buys a museum wants. Secondly, if it's a big collection, even if it's something that they want, maybe they already have something similar, or they have the same thing, or very close. But then they have to storage, they have to insurance, and they cannot show it because they have plans for the next 5 years to show the stuff. So the collector says, well, if I cannot donate it, then and if I have enough money, I'm going to open my own space. But nobody's going to come to see it. Well, I don't care. I'm going to do it. I know somebody, and it used to be a German dealer and a very good art gallery in Berlin, and for some reason he ended up living in Australia. And he has a very good collection, actually. And he opened a beautiful space in Canberra, which is, I don't know who goes there, but it's a beautiful building. He hired an incredible architect to do this museum, but he loves it. It's his money, and it's his collection, and if he wants to do it, what can you do?
So how has, I mean, you've learned a lot about collecting.
Yes.
Through all these conversations. How have these conversations impacted your collection? You are also a collector. Have you, what have you learned that's important for you, that's valuable for you? Has there been an impact on your strategy, your outlook, your approach?
If you read the book and with the interviews that I did, you will see that there are a lot of contradictions between how one collector collects and another collector collects. And so if I had to listen to it and decide which opinion I like better, it will be very confusing because it's really opposite sides of the spectrum. And so I know that the way that I collect now is not the way I collected 20 years ago. I mean, everybody learns with the process. And, but even if you learn, and if your desire to have something is stronger than your intellect, let's say, sometimes you still do it, knowing that it goes against what you learned that you should do. What is better? I'm asking you. What is better, to own 20 pieces of, let's say, good artists, or one piece of a very important artist?
One piece of a very important artist.
Because you're a director of a museum. But if you, when you're a collector and you see that other piece that is that you feel that it's important to you, that is going to talk to your other works of art that you have in your house. Because you trust that this piece, this artist is going to be an important artist in the future, or because you're going to follow that artist. That it's called passion, and has nothing to do with your head. And so you said, I'm going to do it. And you end up buying 20 pieces of maybe not so famous artists instead of that big piece. Because if you're a collector that has passion, you don't have the patience to wait for the end of the year to buy the big piece. You spend the money before.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, you want to buy a big piece and you don't have any more money.
I do want to be clear that what I should do is rarely what I actually do. So I tend to buy.
But isn't it Phillips? Isn't it Duncan Phillips an example? He didn't buy only great works of art.
He did.
He did many great works of art.
Danny, I'm going to put my foot down here.
But I have to tell you, when he bought them, were they considered by the rest of the world great works of art?
Well,
that's really, a no.
The answer is no. You're correct. Right.
That's a no. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, everybody buys and thinks that it's going to be. Some people are right and some people are wrong. And time will tell. That's another thing that I learned from the collectors. Like in everything else, there are trends and there are fashion moments. And you go to an art fair 20 years ago, and most of the art galleries were showing photographs. Then you went to 10 years ago, and it was a lot of abstract art. You go now, I was there last week in France, and everything is figurative art. And so there are tendencies and there are trends. And the collectors are part of this because they buy whatever is there. But at the end of so the question is, in a fair there are, let's say, I'm going to give you an example, any number. Let's say there are 100 galleries, and each gallery represents 10 artists, so that means there are 1,000 artists in the show. Today, you go to a show today, there are 1,000 artists. How many of those 1,000 artists you think there are going to be in an art book in 60, 100 years from now?
Right.
Very few. Maybe none of them. So who says what's great? And I think it's time. What it says. Time, it's like a coffee filter. You put a lot of artists in the thing, and then at the end, there are some drops, and those are the great ones. And it's because time showed that those were important in the history of art, because they changed something, because they started something new. And upstairs, we can see that.
Yeah.
But he was a visionary.
He was. Yeah, I mean, he had an among his strategies was to encourage artists. He actually had an encouragement collection. We have a lot of works of art in our encouragement collection, which rarely make it out to the walls. And he did that because he wanted to support the artists he was meeting. He thought they might have some potential, and he wasn't even sure. He just thought they had potential. So this brings us to maybe my final question. Yeah, my final question. And then we're going to open it up, and you guys can ask questions. So who among your interviewees should get the award of the 21st century Duncan Phillips?
It's very hard.
It's not the guy buying Rembrandt.
No. Well, it's hard because for different reasons, maybe different people. But not 3 months ago, I interviewed a couple they're not in the book, in Chicago. African-American couple. professionals. They started collecting when they're students. She ended up being the daughter of Michelle Obama, and she's the one who delivered the two girls. And he is an investment banker, or something like that. And they met when they were very young. They didn't have any money. They were in the university, and they started collecting because a friend of them said to them, "Come, I want to introduce you to an artist." And they went to their studio, and they fell in love with a very small painting that they still have. And of course, they started, that was the first thing they did, and they told me that they were so ashamed that they bought it, that they hid it under the bed, because they didn't want the parents to come and see that they bought a painting when they didn't have money to pay the rent. So, but they started, they did better professionally and so on, but they always collected African American art. And they have an extraordinary collection. All the names that are big names today, they bought them 25, 30 years ago. And also a very good eye. And they are opening, they have the collection in their home. But they bought a house behind this big house that they have, and they're going to convert that into a small museum. But they still will not have enough room to put everything they have. But those, I think, are people like Duncan Phillips. Because of the passion and because of the vision, and because they were focused on buying certain type of art and helping all of those artists. Mm. Because those artists were not making a lot of money at that time. They were almost, I mean, they were all broke, and they helped them a lot. They were buying on monthly installments, and they were helping, and they were doing parties in their small apartment so the artists can sell to other people, etc. So they were mecenas, they were patrons of the art. They didn't even know it. So that's my answer.
All right, I like it. So we have some time for you to join in the conversation. Connie.
This is really thrilling to listen to, and I'm so excited to read the book. I'm Connie Carter, and I'm proud to say that my first dollar was spent on a painting. I sold 8 shares of Gulf Oil and asked my mom, could I buy this painting? I didn't have a bed or anything. So, but I'm certain that I don't have an important collection, mainly because I buy things I like, and I don't have a strategy for ownership. If you were advising somebody younger in this audience, are there cities one has to go to? How was it that the young couple you just described found themselves intersecting with lives of artists that turned out to be relevant? Because you're hit or miss, right, in terms of whether you get to be exposed to good art.
Well, in this case, because they were students in the university, and those were their friends, and this one friend introduced the couple to other artists in Chicago.
So these are all Chicago artists that turned out to be great.
Most of them were not all, no. Now the collection expanded, and they're buying art in Africa and art in Latin America and art in Europe too. But originally the collection was only people from Chicago, and then African Americans from all over the country.
The couple I find the most beguiling is the postal worker and the teacher
Mm-hmm.
who had the wonderful movie of
That's another example.
they took one salary and read Art in America all the time. And,
Yeah.
they had $30,000 each, right? And spent $30,000 on their art and $30,000 to live.
But they had a very good group of friends, because they were friends with Jasper Jones and the Rauschenberg, and everybody was Jim Dine. They had a small apartment, and people were going to see him, and the friends, artists, introduced him to other artists, and that's how we do.
But people can't hear you, so maybe she should have the mic, because it's...
Okay.
Yeah. Danny, of the collectors you interviewed, what proportion grew up with quality art on the walls and therefore spent their lives enhancing collections versus those that really started de novo?
The people most of the people I interviewed were people who started from scratch. They didn't continue with the family collection. There were some, but not the majority started by themselves, from scratch.
What kind of rules did you find that collectors, do they ever set for themselves? Like, I will only buy this number, or I will only spend this amount, or a spouse will have the first, veto. What kind of rules have you encountered?
If there is a couple who collects, there's always, of course, one is stronger than the other. But I don't think they respect the rules very much, because they finally try to convince the partner that that's going to be okay. I did it with my wife, and I had some rules that I had to obey. But if I wanted to buy something, and I was always with her, so I said, I think I'm going to buy this, and she would say, I don't think so. And I said, but let me buy it because I think you're going to get used to it. And sometimes I got away with it, but sometimes I didn't. And if I bought something that she didn't like from the beginning, and then she didn't like later, I had to put it in storage. But it's interesting about when it's a couple who collects. But there is always one that is stronger than the other, who is more into, that spends more time into it. And so I think that's the person who is going to be more influential. That's what I would say.
Use the microphone, please. Thank you, Ellen.
You've made a lot of references to collections in Europe and Spain. I'm wondering, did you interview any of the collectors here in Washington, D.C.? And
Yes.
what was your experience?
Yes, I collect some. Barbara Levinas right here. I interviewed her and Aaron, and I interviewed Mitch Rails, which in Washington, D.C. also.
The Rubels have a museum in
The
Washington.
Rubels have a museum, but I interviewed them in Miami, but they have a museum here too. So I did. Yes, Antoine.
So I've never asked you this question, Danny. You talked about how other collectors started. I've seen your collection. How did you start? And then I've one more question. It is, can you actually develop an eye? I mean, it's clear some people have it, other people don't. But can you develop an eye?
Oh, sure. Sorry to answer. But go, you answer.
Well, I'm not that so sure. But I started because my mother. And my mother was she used to paint. She was a fashion designer, and she loved art. And when I was very young, she took me to art classes. I had an art teacher. My brother went to art school. My other brother went to architectural school. My brother, Gabi, opened an art gallery. So it was in the family, but I think that everything was, the reason that we all went into that was because of my mother. And I started collecting when I was very young, and I collected posters. I went to New York when I was 17 or 18 years old, and I couldn't buy art. So I would buy the posters of the exhibitions. And I went to the different museums, and I was, maybe Jasper Jones was showing something, and I bought the poster of Jasper, and I still have them. And then little by little, because my profession was, I was doing better economically, financially, so I started buying art from Argentinian artists first. And then I moved to the United States in 1980. And when I moved here, I started buying Washington artists. At that time in 1980, there were a lot of galleries in Washington. There are not that many now, unfortunately. And I started buying local art. And then I started traveling again for business, and I used to go to the fairs, and into the art galleries, and I started buying art from Europe and especially Latin America. My collection at one point was maybe 60-70% Latin American artists, from Mexico all the way to Argentina. And it was something that I didn't try to do, but every time that I would go to a gallery or to an art fair, I would be attracted to something that was, and then I find out it was from Latin America. So there was some connection there, and that's the reason. But then I expanded and ended up buying art from all over the world. But you know, most of going back to you, the collectors, there's a collector from India, and there are collectors from Greece, an important collector in Greece, from Italy. So I went all over the place interviewing people, but I still have to do a lot in the United States. I have to interview collectors in California, for instance, and there are some great collectors there. And then I want to go to China and to Japan. I've been there before, but I'm not interviewing people. In Japan, there are some incredible collectors.
Mm.
His second question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you develop an eye for art?
I don't know. I will say no, but I don't know. Everything can be learned. You have to study a lot, but as you say, can you develop taste? You have it or you don't have it.
Dani, what is the genesis? You know, a book is a work of art as well. At what point did you say, I think I have an idea here? What drew you to creating and collecting all of these stories into, I love the title, for they are guardians, the collectors are guardians of this art. What was the moment in which you said, I think I have a book idea?
Well, first of all, let me tell you about the Guardians of Art, because the person who came up with the name The Guardians of Art is here in the audience. And Miguel Albero is a good friend of mine. And when I was, and it's a perfect name. And he gave me that idea, and because I showed him the book and the articles, and I thought it was absolutely perfect. So that's the name. The book, you were not here when I said that I started writing articles, and Mirella insisted that I should put them all together and do a book. And so she was my inspiration. I didn't do it when she was alive, but then when she died, I thought it was my best homage, and that's why I dedicated the book to her, because she insisted that I do it. But it was never, at the beginning, was never my idea to actually have a book. Now I want to do a number 2, but because I love this, I enjoy this very much. And I really enjoy meeting the collectors, because it's full of surprises. And I have to tell you, the way that I interview people, and you asked me that question before and I didn't complete the answer. When I go to interview these collectors, I don't interview them as a journalist. And I don't interview them as an art critic. I go there as a colleague. I am a collector too. Not as big as they are, but I'm a collector. So, you know what I do so they lower their guard and they can start talking to me if they don't know me, is I tell them stories about me. I tell them stories about my family, about my grandchildren. And so if you share with them your stories, they're much more willing to share with you their stories. And so we end up talking about their families. And what are they going to do? They have 2 kids. Who's going to get the collection? They tell you things that they will not tell to a journalist from Art Forum or Art in America. It's true, because they feel more comfortable. Now, I don't disclose anything that they tell me that is not proper, but I get a feeling about the person that I think a journalist will not get. They will describe what they collect, they will describe the space. I am trying to describe the collector. And I think that makes a difference.
Here, Dani. Do you realize that you are now collecting collectors and that you have your eye for art is your eye for collectors because you choose them in a certain way?
Yes.
So is this your next big collection?
It is already a collection of collectors. And actually, I keep doing these interviews, and I did a few just in the last 3 months. Again, I enjoy doing this very much. It's fun to talk to them, to learn from them. I learned a lot. It's interesting to go to their places. I'll tell you, if we have time, my last interview was in Düsseldorf. And this was, I was introduced to this collector by this man who just opened a place in Australia. And so I go to Düsseldorf, and he has a museum. The museum has the name of the beginning of the two names of the son and the daughter. And it used to be an old glass factory, 30,000 square feet. And he's a developer who buys old buildings and converts them into studios for artists, or he converts them into apartments for artists. He rents it to the city, through the city, but especially helping the arts community. And he has a collection. So I go to the museum first. I go around the museum. The director of the museum shows me around. He has his own art, but he also has 2 exhibitions of artists that he likes. Beautiful museum. And then I meet him. And I said, I would like to interview you in your house. As I said before, that's what I like to do. So he says, fine, we'll go to my house. And the following day, he picks me up and we go to his home. And he says to me, can we go to my mother's home first? Because I want to show you real art. And so she lives in the same block, but across the street, 3 houses north. And so we go there, and the mother is, I don't know the age, but let's say 93, 94, 95, I don't know, something like that. She's sitting down. She's a very small woman. And he says, this is Dani, and I want him to see your collection. When he said that, this 94-year-old woman got up like with a spring. And she says, in English, she says, I'm going to show Dani my collection. And she starts taking me around the house, and every time that she talks about a painting, she gets a book from the library, and she says, I bought this and this book, and it's in this catalog, and this. You cannot believe the enthusiasm of this woman. I mean, she came back to life. And when she takes me to the living room, there is, on one wall, there is a portrait of Jacqueline by Picasso, and in the other wall, there is a portrait by Picasso of Dora Maar. So that gives you the idea of the rest of the collection. And she had one room just with drawings of George Grosz. One room, just full of drawings. And she had Jan Arp and Calder, an incredible collection. And so I said to Guy, the son, I said, maybe I should be interviewing your mother and not you. And he says, you're right. He says, but you'll see the difference. And so then I went to his house, and there was not 1 inch in the wall that there was not art. But there was all young artists, mostly Germans. Düsseldorf is a place that has an incredible school of art. Most of the big photographers in Germany come from Düsseldorf. And so he gets to know all these young people who are going to the art school, and that's what he buys. And it's a fantastic collection, and the museum is with this type of art. So every time that I interview somebody, I learn something new, and it's a different experience. That's why I'm not going to stop. As long as there are collectors, I'm going to be interviewing them.
I I think that might be the right note on which to conclude our conversation.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Let's give Dani a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Dani, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We're glad you're here at the Phillips Collection, and we hope you join us for the book signing outside. Have a great evening.
Thank you.